During the months of October and November of 1983, the small town of Dunwich Hollow, nestled deep in the state of Vermont, was gripped by a silence many still describe as thick. The morning fog would roll over the fields and slowly swallow the old houses, one by one, as if time itself had finally decided to erase what never should have been remembered. It was in this context that I stumbled upon the story of the Belfords, or rather, crashed into it like someone uncovering a buried mirror, old, filthy, and reflecting things no one should see. If this story already makes you uneasy, maybe you should subscribe to the channel. Believe me, the next revelations are even more disturbing. At the time, I was working as an intern for a local newspaper, covering mundane topics like pumpkin contests or town council meetings, but a forgotten article from the 1950s, folded inside a yellowed edition of the Dunwich Gazette, changed the trajectory of my life. The headline caught my eye: Belford family takes in 9 orphans, but no official records found. It read like a typo or a poorly told joke. How could someone adopt 9 children without leaving a single trace? In the article, only one name appeared repeatedly: Thomas Belford. The man, described as a widower and owner of an old Victorian house at the end of the municipal road, reportedly arrived in town with the children around 1947. There were no celebrations, no photos, just a brief, uncomfortable note. Curious, I went through the municipal archives. The Belford estate was still marked on the map, but there were no birth certificates, adoption papers, or school enrollment records for any of the children. It was as if they had never existed, or worse, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase them completely. The house, known among locals as the property of the 9, had been abandoned for decades, windows boarded up, and a wrought iron gate welded shut from the inside. On a gray afternoon, I decided to visit the place. The road leading there seemed to warp time itself. Overgrown weeds overtook the trail, and no sound of birds or wind reached that forgotten corner of the county. When I finally saw the house, I had the distinct feeling it was staring back at me. The windows looked like angry shut eyes. The door, a whisper, waiting to happen. Later, I discovered the house had been built in 1893 by a Hungarian architect who mysteriously disappeared right after the project was completed. Elderly locals swore they still heard sounds at night, like children running inside the house, even though no one had lived there since the mid-1960s. The town sheriff, an old man named Walter Reeves, refused to comment on anything related to the Belfords. He only said, "Some things are better left buried, son." When I asked why, he replied, "Because sometimes what you think is dead is just waiting." The feeling that something was deeply wrong about this story began to grow inside me like a silent fungus. I started investigating not only the Belfords, but any clue that could lead me to the origin of those 9 children. All I found were fragments: a torn photo tucked in an old library book, a wooden cross with the symbol of an eye pierced by an arrow, and finally, a diary locked inside a chest hidden in my grandmother's attic, who, oddly enough, knew the name Thomas Belford, even though we had never spoken about it before. What would soon be revealed in the pages of that diary and in the basements of that house, which I would eventually break into, defied all logic. What I uncovered later involved blood pacts, purchased silences, and a ritualistic repetition spanning more than 3 generations. And through it all, the town of Dunwich Hollow remained a silent accomplice. But this is only the beginning. The Belford estate was unlike any property I had ever seen, not because of its size, though it was large, or its decayed beauty, but because of what it seemed to resist. Nature hadn't taken it, decay hadn't ruined it, time hadn't erased it. It stood, as if protected by something that didn't belong to this world. The wrought iron gate was still welded shut, so I entered from the back, cutting through the wild hedgerows and tall yellowing grass. The back door was broken, its frame hanging like a slack jaw. I stepped inside. The interior was dense with the scent of mildew, wood rot, and something metallic, like old blood. Dust hung in the air as if caught in a state of suspended animation. The house was untouched. No signs of squatters, no graffiti, no vandalism, just preserved silence. In the parlor, the wallpaper peeled like burnt skin. A grand piano sat in the corner, keys yellowed, but intact. There were children's drawings scattered across the floor, crudely drawn figures, all with their eyes scratched out. On the mantel, 9 small figurines stood in a perfect row, each different, each handmade, each with a symbol carved into the base: a crescent, a dagger, a spiral, a flame, a door, a crown, a skull, an eye, and the last one, blank. I took photos. I recorded everything. In the hallway, there was a portrait, large, oil, framed in black wood. The subject was a man in a dark suit, unsmiling, with piercing gray eyes. A plaque beneath it read simply, Thomas Belford, Roman numeral 1893. His stare was cruel. I felt it burn through me. In the study, I found the first real clue. Behind a false panel in a bookcase, hidden between volumes on Victorian hygiene and agrarian reform, was a collection of letters tied with black ribbon. Most were written in Hungarian, which I had to have translated later, but the name repeated in every letter chilled me. Sukseg zeru akilens, azaito megnilik chak igi. The 9 are necessary, only thus shall the door be opened. The writer, a man named István Belford, claimed to have fled from Esztergom, Hungary, in the year 1884 after participating in something he called the 13th harvest. He described rituals in the forest, cloaked figures, and the selection of children from orphanages without ties or names. These children, he wrote, were not meant to be raised, but prepared. István's final letter, dated December the 13th, 1888, was almost illegible with erratic ink strokes and phrases repeated again and again. The flesh remembers, the cycle returns, the flesh remembers, the door is nearly open, the blood must root the stone. The letter ended with a symbol drawn in crimson ink, a circle enclosing 3 smaller circles, arranged like the points of a triangle, and beneath it, a single word, kapuor. I later learned this meant gatekeeper in Hungarian. I had to stop reading. The town library yielded more. I began to notice patterns. Newspaper archives from the year 1948 showed a sudden spike in missing persons across surrounding counties, all between the ages of 4 and 12. The cases were all closed within weeks. Runaways, domestic disputes, unverified sightings, all brushed aside. The editors at the time, I learned, had ties to the city council and to a defunct organization known only as the Ninefold Circle. Every time I asked questions, I was met with silence or odd looks. One woman, Mrs. Abigail Kerr, then in her late 90s, agreed to meet me. She had lived next door to the Belford property until the year 1956, when she abruptly moved across the state. They arrived in silence, she said. One day the house was empty. The next, it was filled with children who never played, never spoke, always in black, always with that man watching. Thomas? I asked. No, she whispered. The man before Thomas, the one who called himself the Sour. She showed me an old pendant, an iron disc with the same symbol I'd seen in the letter. He told me I'd forget, and I did, until your voice brought it back. Before I could ask more, she began to cry uncontrollably. Her daughter asked me to leave. The deeper I went, the more the town seemed to recoil. The local school records had been gutted, years of enrollment logs removed, census records altered, property deeds amended. Only one place still held the truth, the house itself. I returned, this time with tools. In the basement, beneath rotted floorboards, I found a stairwell descending further, hidden, silent. The air grew colder with each step. The chamber below was stone-lined, octagonal, and covered in carvings, glyphs that mirrored those on the figurines upstairs. At the center was a circular altar, surrounded by 9 small stone seats. Bones littered the floor, small bones, and a name etched into the stone in jagged script, Belford. There was more, so much more, but my flashlight began to flicker, and I couldn't stay long. I took one bone, wrapped it in cloth, and left. DNA tests later confirmed it belonged to a child, female, approximately 10 years old. No known relatives, likely dead for over 70 years. There were 9 figurines, 9 missing children, and as I would discover soon, 9 generations of ritual repetition, each with a Thomas, each serving the gatekeeper. When I returned from the basement, bone in hand and heart racing, I knew I could no longer treat this as a local mystery. It was generational. It was ritualistic. It was planned. Over the next few weeks, I devoted myself entirely to the history of the Belfords. I took a leave of absence from the paper and moved temporarily into a rental cabin near Dunwich Hollow. I built a wall of documents, literal strings connecting names, dates, photos. But everything truly began with a journal I hadn't expected to find. It was discovered inside a hidden compartment beneath the piano in the Belford house. The compartment was lined with velvet and sealed with an ornate mechanism that required aligning 9 iron pegs to specific symbols. The pattern matched the figurines on the mantel. I don't know how I guessed it. Maybe it was instinct or something deeper guiding me. Inside was a leather-bound volume, brittle but preserved. On the inside cover, a name, M. Belford, November the 13th, 1923, and below it, a short passage. To forget is to sin. To remember is to suffer. But the 9th must always remember. The journal was written in a strange alternating script, English interspersed with lines in Latin, Hungarian, and a dialect I couldn't identify. But across the pages, one phrase echoed, again and again, in red ink. The offering must be 9, not 8, not 10, 9, always 9. I read for hours. The entries began mundane, notes about household affairs, gardening, the difficulty of keeping the children quiet at night. Then slowly, the tone darkened. One passage chilled me beyond words. March the 4th, 1924. The twins screamed when they saw the altar. I told them it was just a game. They don't remember the forest, they don't remember the lake, but something in them knows. When they sleep, they speak in the old tongue. Sometimes, they speak in unison. Later entries detailed rituals in poetic but horrifying terms. The fire cleanses the weak. The stone remembers the strong. Blood over salt, salt over ash. The circle unbroken. By now I was certain. Each generation of the Belfords had performed the same rite. The taking in of 9 children, the eventual disappearance of those children, and the preservation of one, always one, as the chronicler, the 9th, and it was always someone named Thomas. In the town's historic society, a tiny brick building on the edge of Main Street, I requested access to archived portraits from the early 20th century. The curator, an elderly man named Robert Fenwick, agreed under one condition. If you see something you wish you hadn't, don't tell me about it. He led me to the back, into a temperature-controlled vault. Inside were dozens of photographs, school groups, town events, holiday gatherings. I began sorting through them, year by year. What I saw made my blood freeze. In nearly every group photo between the years 1925 and 1960, there was a child who appeared again and again, always at the edge, always in black, always staring directly at the camera with the same expressionless face. The same face. I cross-referenced school rosters. This child's name never appeared, but in each image, there was a note on the back, property of the circle. Some photos had faces scratched out. Some had been burned partially and restored. But one image, dated Harvest Night, Roman numeral 1947, showed the Belford property behind a group of children, all in ceremonial robes, holding lanterns carved from hollowed turnips. Not pumpkins, turnips. An older tradition. The boy at the center wore an amulet, the same symbol from the Hungarian letters. 3 circles in a triangle. I brought the photos back to my cabin. That night, I had my first dream. I was in the stone chamber again, but this time, the seats were occupied. 9 children sat silently, eyes sewn shut with thread. They hummed a single note in unison, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest. The altar was slick with blood. The figure across from me, Thomas, or what had once been Thomas, held a book in one hand and a curved blade in the other. He smiled, not cruelly, not joyfully, just inevitability. Then I awoke. The next discovery came through the will of a woman named Dorothea Belford, who died in 1989 under unusual circumstances. I gained access to her sealed probate documents via a sympathetic archivist in the Vermont State Court. Her final words, "Let them dig. Let them find what we could not cleanse. We served the pact. Let the last cycle end with me. No more gates. No more blood." Included was a single page, handwritten in trembling script, titled Chronology of Sacrifice. 1893, arrival of István Belford from Esztergom, First American Harvest. 1923, expansion of ritual circle, use of orphans formalized. 1947, disappearance of 9 untraceables, silence purchased. 1972, fire at orphanage, no survivors, 9 names erased. 1983, final gate cycle predicted, watch for the spiral moon. At the bottom, if the 9th survives, the gate remains closed. If the 9th joins, it opens again. The spiral moon, I learned, referred to a lunar pattern occurring once every 83 years, a convergence of equinox, harvest moon, and perigee. It was set to repeat in the coming year. That meant the ritual wasn't finished. That meant someone, somewhere, was preparing the next 9. I received an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside was a photograph of a child, no older than 8, standing outside what appeared to be a new foster center. On the back, written in red ink, "One has already been chosen. Do not interfere, 9th. The game was not over. I had found the journal. I had inherited the memory. And now they believed I was the 9th. By the time I began digging into the people around Dunwich Hollow, not just the Belfords but the families who stayed silent, it had become clear that this was never about one house or one name. The conspiracy was wider, older, and far more deliberate. I started with the oldest surviving newspaper editor from the Dunwich Gazette, a man named Calvin Huxley, who had retired in the year 1985 after a stroke left him partially paralyzed. I tracked him to a care facility just outside of Montpellier. His mind was sharp, but guarded. I knew about the orphans, he said the moment I introduced myself. We all did, but it was never written, never discussed. We were told, print and survive, dig and disappear. So we printed what we were given. Who gave the orders? I asked. He looked at the window for a long time before answering. The Council of Ninefold Trustees. He described a private committee that had functioned in the town since at least the early 1900s, made up of town officials, religious leaders, a doctor, and a woman only ever referred to as the seamstress. Their names changed, but the number never did. Always 9. They weren't elected. They weren't visible. But they signed off on everything. Budgets, permits, staff appointments, and no document was considered valid unless it bore the mark of the spiral, a faint watermark in the lower right corner. I had seen it once, in the blueprints for a school that was demolished in 1978 without explanation. When I showed Calvin the journal I had found, his hands trembled. "You're the 9th now," he whispered. "God help you." I requested access to town council meeting minutes from the years 1940 to 1980. My request was denied. No explanation. So I broke into the municipal records room. Inside, I found a filing cabinet marked Decommissioned Properties. In it, I discovered references to a structure called the Ash House, demolished in 1961, just outside the town's limits. According to documents dated Roman numeral 1949, it had once been a children's disciplinary residence, funded privately through an anonymous trust. No public records of its students or staff existed, but there was one detail that stood out. Approved for operational clearance by T. Belford, M.D., the Ash House had been wiped from modern maps, but aerial photos from the 1950s showed its location near a dried-up quarry, now overgrown. I drove there the next morning. What remained of the structure was buried under ivy and moss. Foundations cracked open, blackened brick, a steel door half submerged in mud. I forced it open and descended into a darkness that smelled like old soap, rust, and wet limestone. The basement was largely empty, except for one corridor that ended in a locked steel cabinet. Inside were rows of folders, their paper yellowed and brittle. Each file had a name, first name only, and a year. Ezra, 1947. Clara, 1951. Milo, 1958, each with notations. Compliant, unresponsive. Candidate 9, rejected. 9 names appeared consistently across decades. 9 trials, 9 files per cycle, and always at the bottom of the last folder. Returned to Hollow for final calibration. I reached out to a retired social worker, Eleanor Price, who had worked briefly with the town's Orphan Allocation Committee in the 1970s. Her response to my letter was short and chilling. They were never meant to be adopted. They were meant to be prepared. She met me only on the condition that I not record her voice. We spoke in her backyard, far from any electronics. She told me the children were selected based on specific genetic traits, blood types, birth dates, ocular markers. The criteria changed each cycle, but always, there was a physical test in the forest, something involving chanting, blindfolds, and a structure called the Spiral Gate. I asked where the gate was. She refused to answer, but she gave me a map, hand-drawn, faded, marked with 9 points that formed a triangle over the county. My final confrontation came with the current mayor of Dunwich Hollow, Marshall T. Belford, a distant descendant of the original Thomas. I cornered him during a town charity dinner, showed him the journal, the photos, and the DNA results from the child's bone. He didn't deny anything. Instead, he smiled and said, "The door opens in the next moon. We've done our part. If you expose us, the burden passes to the world. But if you keep the secret, maybe the cycle ends with you." I recorded every word. It was the first and only confession. But that confession never reached the public. A week later, my laptop was stolen. My cloud backups erased. The tape recorder I used shattered, and the old woman who had given me the pendant found dead in her sleep. Natural causes, they said, but the pendant was gone, and in its place, a scrap of paper pinned to my door. "You are the 9th. The door knows. The town of Dunwich Hollow does not speak, but it remembers. Every name, every scream, every year that passes without a reckoning only buries the truth deeper. And every generation, a new cycle begins, a new spiral forms, a new 9th is chosen, and I am beginning to understand what that truly means." I returned to the Belford estate on the night of the spiral moon. The calendar aligned, the harvest moon, the perigee, and the equinox, an event that occurred only once every 83 years. The last time had been in the year 1900. The Belfords were ready then, and they were ready now. So was I. I followed the map Eleanor Price had given me. The 9 points she marked converged on a forest clearing northeast of town, a circular hollow hidden within Dunwich Preserve. I arrived before midnight. There were no lights, no sounds, but the moment I crossed the tree line, I felt the air change, heavy, electric, old. At the center of the clearing stood the spiral gate. It wasn't a gate in the traditional sense. It was a structure of stone, overgrown with moss and vines, forming a spiral ramp that descended into the earth. Runes etched into its outer walls glowed faintly under the moonlight. At its peak, the symbol of 3 circles in triangle formation. At the base, a sealed stone door. The door had 9 indentations, arranged like a clock. Each indentation was roughly the size of the figurines from the Belford mantle. I had brought them. As I placed each figurine into its slot, crescent, dagger, spiral, flame, door, crown, skull, eye, the symbols began to pulse. When I placed the 9th, the blank figurine, in its center slot, the door opened with a sound that vibrated through my bones. Beyond it, stone stairs descending into complete blackness. I used a lantern, old and oil-based, to preserve the atmosphere and the silence. The passage spiraled downward for what felt like an hour. Every few meters there were carvings on the wall, scenes of children kneeling before masked figures, circles of fire, bleeding trees, and, repeatedly, a depiction of a door within the earth, and always, near the top of these carvings, the words in Latin, Memoriae per sanguinem, ostium per nonum, memory through blood, the door through the 9th. At the bottom, I entered the first chamber. It was round, with walls lined in bone. 9 stone beds formed a circle. At the center, a pedestal holding a book bound in skin, the Codex Spiralum. I could not read its entirety. The language shifted between Latin, Hungarian, and what looked like Proto-Germanic, but the illustrations told the story clearly. 9 children, chosen for their silence, absence, and disposability. 1 chosen for remembrance. Each cycle begins with sowing, the placement of orphans. Each cycle ends with harvest, the reclaiming of 8. The 9th must witness, must record, must live. The gate feeds on memory, not blood alone. Witnessed blood, experienced pain, preserved ritual. Without a living record, the cycle fails. With it, the gate deepens. I entered the second chamber, larger, octagonal, with massive mirrors covering every wall. In the center, 9 robes, child-sized, arranged around a basin of dried blood. Above them, etched into the ceiling, was the phrase in Old Hungarian, Akilinch, mindig akilinch, egisem hiányozhat. The 9, always the 9. None may be absent. This room was designed for the final ceremony. One of the robes, the 9th, was different, heavier, marked with the gatekeeper's seal. Whoever wore it did not die. They remembered. They carried the ritual into the next generation. I looked into the mirror. For a moment I didn't see myself. I saw a boy, my age, perhaps younger, wearing the robe, holding the journal I had found. His face was mine. But his eyes were hollow, as if something behind them had burned out long ago. I pressed deeper, into the third chamber. There were jars, dozens of them, each labeled with names, dates, and symbols. Inside, hair, teeth, fingers, preserved remains of children, sacrifices from every cycle. I found one labeled, Ezra, Candidate 9, Rejected, 1947, and another, Unnamed, Accepted, Cycle Complete, 1923. At the far end of the room was a stone altar with 9 notches. Blood channels fed into a basin beneath it. This was not symbolic, it was mechanical. The ritual required precision, not just the act of killing, but the manner of sacrifice, the sequence, the preservation, the observation. This wasn't religion, this was engineering. The fourth chamber was the deepest. It contained a single object, a stone sarcophagus, sealed with iron bands, and a symbol scorched into the lid. I recognized it from the earliest documents. Kapuor, gatekeeper. A whisper echoed as I stepped closer. I couldn't make out the words, but I understood the meaning. It knew I was there. It knew I remembered. I touched the sarcophagus. My vision blurred. The air rippled, and I saw it. A vision of the first cycle. The year was 1884. A group of men and women, cloaked, surrounding a lake under the spiral moon. 9 children in black robes stood silently before them. One screamed and was struck down. The others remained. The leader, Istvan Belford, held up the Codex Spiralum and recited words I could not comprehend. The lake turned black. The sky broke open, and from the lake a door of bone emerged. They did not open it. They fed it, and from that day onward, the land was cursed to remember or to bleed. When the vision faded, I awoke outside the gate, the stone door sealed behind me. It was dawn. In my hand, I held a page from the Codex, a fragment that must have torn free. When the ninth forgets, the door sleeps. When the ninth records, the door listens. When the ninth joins, the door opens. They had let me see everything. Because I was part of it now. I was the ninth, and the next cycle had already begun. I didn't sleep after the vision. I couldn't. For weeks I tried to convince myself that what I saw beneath the spiral gate was some kind of hallucination, a projection of trauma, fear, or inherited madness. But the truth clung to me. It lingered on my clothes, behind my eyes, in the tremble of my voice. So I did what I had to do. I compiled everything. Documents from the ash house, the codex fragment, photos from the orphanage, the sarcophagus, the names of the children erased from records, the journal, the bones. I submitted everything to a federal investigative reporter I trusted, Dana Rothschild, based out of Boston. She had built her reputation uncovering church cover-ups in Rhode Island and medical conspiracies in New Jersey. When she saw the materials, her response was simple. If even 10% of this is real, it's the biggest buried atrocity in American history. She asked for time to verify. I gave her access to the house. I gave her Eleanor Price's map. I gave her the location of the spiral gate. Then I waited. Within 1 week, Dana went missing. Not vanished entirely. Her car was found, parked at a rest stop outside Dunwich Hollow, with her laptop in the trunk and her wallet still in the glove compartment. No signs of struggle. Her last known message, a voicemail left on my burner phone. It's real. I found it. You need to run. They're not people. Not anymore. After that, silence. 3 days later, the spiral gate was filled with concrete by state authorities. A dangerous sinkhole was the explanation. All paths through Dunwich Preserve were closed off. The town issued a public statement denouncing rumors of cult activity, attributing it to online urban legend contamination. But I wasn't done. I went to the state attorney general with everything. Their response? We're reviewing the evidence. I requested forensic testing on the bone I had recovered from the chamber. 2 weeks later, the lab contacted me. Not with a report, but with a warning. The sample has been reclassified under sealed federal protocol. You are not authorized for further inquiry. Everything I touched began to vanish. The social worker who helped me trace the Ash House children, dead in a fire. The editor who confessed the council's complicity, slipped into a coma. Eleanor Price, gone. Her home emptied. Her existence reduced to a death notice with no listed cause. And the Codex Spiralum fragment, stolen from my secured storage unit. No footage, no fingerprints. The only evidence I had left was myself. So I went public. I leaked redacted versions of the files. I posted excerpts from the journal. I published photographs of the children with their faces scratched out, the notations from the Ash House, the statements from Dorothea Belford's will. The story went viral for 72 hours. The Belford 9 trended across platforms. Independent investigators reached out, podcasters, TikTok sleuths, Reddit threads exploded. For a moment, the darkness cracked. Then it was gone. Posts were taken down, accounts suspended. My articles were debunked by shell accounts. An anonymous fact-checking group released statements calling my investigation a hoax based on urban folklore and doctored photographs. Even reputable journalists who initially supported me recanted under pressure. The blackout was surgical. That's when they sent me a final message. It came in a plain envelope. Inside, a newspaper clipping from the Dunwich Gazette, dated November the 13th, 2025. A simple headline: Local benefactor sponsors Orphan Integration Program. 9 children receive permanent housing. No names, no photos, just a handwritten note beneath it. The door was never meant to be closed, only managed. Thank you for your service, Ninth. But it didn't end there. A month later, construction crews demolished the Belford estate, officially to clear unstable ground. But during demolition, the workers uncovered a sealed concrete vault in the foundation. Inside were hundreds of boxes labeled only by years and cycles. Ritual clothing, bones, journals, medical reports, recordings. The leak came from an anonymous worker who uploaded video of the boxes to a burner account. The footage was blurry, but what could be seen were dozens of small skulls stacked neatly, each painted with a symbol. One had the gatekeeper mark. It was my face, or someone wearing it. The footage forced a reopening of the case. State forensic teams recovered over 300 remains. Most were children, some dating back to the early 1900s. A mass grave hidden beneath a town's legacy. A press conference was held. The governor called it a tragedy born of institutional failure. The town of Dunwich Hollow was placed under temporary federal oversight. The mayor, Marshall T. Belford, resigned without charges. No trial was ever held. Why? Because according to the final forensic report, evidence suggests ritualistic practices, but the presence of hallucinogenic agents and folklore complicates formal prosecution. No surviving victim can corroborate intent or sequence. No surviving victim. As if I didn't count. A monument was built where the estate once stood, a simple stone circle engraved with the words, "To the forgotten, to the voiceless, to the nine." But they never buried the truth, they preserved it. And with every generation that passes without reckoning, the door listens. Because the ritual isn't about belief, it's about memory. And as long as someone, anyone, remembers, the cycle survives. And I remember everything. After the remains beneath the Belford estate were recovered, and the story of the 9 orphans finally made international news, it seemed, briefly, that justice might take root. Federal task forces were formed. New historical commissions launched sweeping reviews of orphanage closures across New England. Survivors of other suspected lost institutions began coming forward, often elderly, their memories fragmented, but their stories alarmingly similar. But even then, the deeper implication, the ritual, was considered too far-fetched for mainstream discourse. The term ritualized trauma replaced sacrificial patterns. The phrase intergenerational complicity was used in place of cult lineage, and no one, not officially, dared speak the words I had read 100 times. The 9, the door, the 9th. The memorial in Dunwich Hollow was unveiled 6 months later, clean, somber, and barren of context. But behind closed doors, there was panic. In Hartford, a city planner traced funding irregularities tied to foster home expansions that never existed under the same anonymous trusts used by the Belfords. In Lowell, Massachusetts, city archives revealed sealed adoption records dating back to the year 1923, with the same pattern: 9 children, 1 retained, 8 vanished. In Esztergom, Hungary, a linguist uncovered scrolls in a monastery crypt bearing the same glyphs I had seen in the Spiral Gate. A forgotten cult known as Az Ajto Magvai, the seeds of the door, active since at least the Roman numeral 15th century. Each location bore the same footprint: isolation, secrecy, 9-fold patterns, and a generational witness whose name, in over half the recovered records, was some variation of Thomas. Then came the fires. In less than 1 year, 4 archival buildings burned down across different states: Vermont, Pennsylvania, Maine, and New Hampshire. Each housed records tied to child welfare transition programs during the 20th century. The fires were ruled accidental. Each blaze occurred on November the 13th. Meanwhile, the journal I had recovered, the one signed M. Belford, November the 13th, 1923, began to spread in unauthorized reproductions. Scholars called it a hoax. Occultists called it scripture. One anonymous linguist decrypted more of the blended languages and claimed the full phrase beneath the Spiral Gate translated as, "The door opens not to believers, but to those who remember." Memory as a ritual, trauma as a mechanism, continuity as the god. Soon, new groups began emerging. They didn't call themselves Belfords. They didn't invoke the gatekeeper, but they used the language, the 9-fold pattern, the spiral in their logos. One group, calling itself the Silent Harvest, hosted a retreat in western Oregon that resulted in the disappearance of 3 children. No charges were filed. The families had been paid off in advance. One father, interviewed anonymously, claimed, "We were told this was a gift, that our child would become more than human, that she would serve a higher pattern." I visited the memorial in Dunwich Hollow on the anniversary of the spiral moon. I stood alone in the circle of stones reading the names. Only 37 were listed. There had been more than 300 confirmed remains. A man approached me, older, long coat, glasses. He said, "They buried the names because names are power, but the door still listens." I asked him what he meant. He replied, "You're not the only 9th, you know." Then he walked into the woods and vanished. A week later, I received a letter, postmarked from Marseille, France. Inside were photocopies of a diary from the year 1869, written by a woman named Elise Belfort. Her entries echoed those of Monsieur Belford almost verbatim. She wrote of 9 children, of silence, of one chosen to watch and remember. She used the same phrase, "La porte entend, le 9e ne dort jamais." The door hears, the 9th never sleeps. I found similar records from Prague, from Antwerp, from Florence. Each time, the same configuration, the same glyphs, the same ritual logic. What the Belfords did was not isolated. They were a single root of a far older tree. In time, a global task force was proposed, a multinational investigation into the historical trafficking of orphans and institutional abuse. But even that movement was co-opted, renamed, redirected. The more dangerous truths were surgically edited out. Words like ritual, sacrifice, and door disappeared from official reports. But underground forums grew. Survivors wrote anonymously. Whistleblowers from the child welfare system leaked documents. Journalists, now working independently, traced patterns as far as South Africa, Argentina, and northern Russia. Always 9, always one witness, always silence in official channels. And then something worse happened. A body was found in Maine, a man in his 30s, throat slit, eyes burned, hands positioned over his chest in a triangle. No ID, no fingerprints. Tattooed on his back were the words, "I broke the cycle. You will not." The media called it a cult killing, but I recognized the positioning of the hands. It matched the stone effigies in the spiral gate chamber. It was the mark of the 9th. Someone had tried to end the cycle completely, and someone had stopped him. I began receiving dreams again. Children in black robes, the humming sound, the stone altar. But now the children's faces were blurred, indistinct, changing, multiplying, and I realized the 9th remembers, but not always the same 9th. The role is passed, inherited, or stolen. Every generation needs a witness, because without memory, the door starves. But with too much memory, it opens wide. So I did the unthinkable. I destroyed everything. The remaining photos, the copies of the codex, the journals. I erased the wall of red thread and ink-stained maps. I closed the files, burned the notebooks, deleted the encrypted archives, because I understood the final truth. It's not the blood that feeds the ritual. It's the telling of it. Every time someone tells the story, it reawakens, strengthens, recalibrates. Each whisper of the 9, each headline, each theory on Reddit, each reenactment, they are all invocations. I had become its greatest servant, not the last Belford, but the loudest. The house is gone, the bones are buried, the world moves on. But somewhere, in a basement, in a church, in an orphanage off the books, the spiral pattern has been drawn again. The new children are being gathered. The 9th is watching. And now that you've heard it, now that you know, you remember too. And the door listens. It's been over 2 years since I last stepped foot in Dunwich Hollow. The spiral scar at the center of the forest has healed, or pretended to. Moss covers what used to be stone. The path that once led to the spiral gate has been redirected, reforested. The townspeople go on. They plant flowers near the memorial. They host remembrance fairs with balloons and smiling children. It makes me sick, but I understand it now. It's not about evil. It's about continuity. They didn't protect the ritual because they believed in it. They protected it because it worked. There's a new mayor now. She was born after the fire, speaks with urgency, dresses modern. She's promised transparency, healing, a new era. And yet, behind her office desk, I saw a framed emblem once carved into the stone altar beneath the estate. 3 circles, arranged in a triangle. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Because I know. The cycle doesn't end. It adapts. I still carry the memory, not by choice. There are nights when I wake from dreams with blood in my mouth. My hands ache from gripping things that aren't there. I hear the hum, soft, deep, inescapable, the tone the children made in the chamber, and I remember the look in their eyes, the sewn-shut trust, the obedience that didn't come from faith, but from fear. They weren't waiting to be saved. They were waiting for the ritual to complete. You may think this was just a story, but if you've reached this far, if something unsettled you, if some part of your mind whispered, "I've seen this before," then you are no longer outside of it. You are remembering, and memory is the contract. That's all the ritual ever needed. They say evil hides in shadows, but that's wrong. It hides in records lost by accident, in orphanages with no oversight, in photos with one child too many, in the face that repeats across generations, in the soft erasure of truth, generation by generation, until only the shape remains, and no one asks where it came from. They don't need to burn books. They just need to convince you the story isn't worth telling. So this is my last recording. I will not speak of the gate again. I will not write of the children again. I will not name the 9th again. Let someone else wear the robe. Let someone else hold the codex. Let someone else feed the spiral. I will forget, not because I want to escape, but because forgetting is the only way to starve it. If this story impacted you, if it made you wonder or shiver or question what else lies buried beneath places like Dunwich Hollow, then don't let it disappear like the others. Like and share it. Preserve the names. Subscribe to the channel, because stories like this don't end, and sometimes remembering is the only weapon we have left. And trust me, the next cycle has already begun.